All right, hello everybody. This is the after party where we literally sit down with political experts and people that are passionate about the venue and the avenue that is Guam politics, and we talk about the show that just happened. So for those of you that were joining us on D18 tonight, thank you so much for streaming. Thank you for jumping back on this stream. Get your comments in the comment stream because we will be discussing all matters of the GEC. I'm Jason Salas alongside Sabrina Salas-Matinani, and we have an excellent panel tonight.
And with us, joining us, our panelists are Senator Fernando Esteves, Attorney Mars Johnson, and of course KUM's analyst Ron McNinch. Thank you guys for being with us.
I think, Senator, this is now like your 5th or 6th opinion. When you hit 7, you actually get a set of steak knives, courtesy of KUAM. So.
Oh, right on the
set of steak
cook
knives.
something.
We've invested in the whole Ginsu set and everything like that. Mars, you're up next, and Ron's like basically Hall of Fame at this point.
He got his second. Got his second set.
Okay, well, speaking of kind of like, Hall of Fame and greatest of and everything, since the GEC was just here and they were talking about managing an election, Ron, you've been with us the longest, so I'd like to start with you.
Sure.
How do you think Maria's tenure, Maria Pangilinan, has been as executive director? Because she's been there for now, throughout the duration of the Calvo administration. Her predecessor was Jerry Titano, immediately. Each executive director has a different style, different skill set they bring to the table. But in your opinion, as a pundit of this kind of thing, how do you think Maria's done?
Well, first, I was on the Election Commission for 2
Right.
years. I had a great time. That's when I had to step out with y'all for a while, back in 2000, 2002. And I've seen a lot of managers or directors of the Election Commission. But I have to say up front, I am biased because Maria Pangilinan's very, very close with my family. Our children were at daycare together when they were babies. She was an employee of UOG. She was a colleague of mine at UOG. So I automatically have a very, very high opinion of her. I know for a fact, 100%, absolutely a professional lady, somebody you can trust and depend on. She knows how to handle stress and pressure. And also, she always follows the law. She always pulls out the book and goes right down the line. She never assumes things. If she needs to check her facts, she checks her facts. Very precise and just an all-around wonderful manager. We want public managers who constantly check and refer to the law. And of all the agencies I've worked with, the election, even I'm on the education board now, the Election Commission was the most emotional agency I had to deal with. People are just very emotional the whole time. And when people are running for races, it does get emotional.
And that's by its nature, because as executive director of the GEC, you have to appease the board, which is, by its nature, half political appointees. There's a Democrat representative, there's a Republican representative, so they've got a lot of their own interests, at opposition as well.
But I also think with Maria, one thing I like about her is the fact that she's so accessible to the media. I mean, I called her last night and I was like, do you think you could come on for D18? And because we had some issues with today's show, and she was on it. And the other thing I like about her is the fact that she has so many new staff members, and she's always trying to lift them up, get them experience like we had tonight.
Yep.
She brought in two staff members with her, trying to get them experience and exposure in front of the media, and just to show, how hard they work. And so I really like her management style, and she's very personable.
Well, Senator, she was actually the executive director, of course, when you had your successful senatorial run. So.
All my experiences with Maria, and then even watching, I have to agree with Ron. Of all of the agencies I've had the pleasure and sometimes displeasure working with during my term, GC has been the most professional. At any given time, Maria, if you ask her, she could probably cite the law almost verbatim, and which is just some of the most basic things you would expect from a director or administrator, and you'd be surprised how many don't even know the law that governs their agency. But Maria is I would say the example of the type of leadership that we want, for any governor in the executive branch. And if she doesn't know, she'll refer to it and she'll get you the answer. I think her leadership style is phenomenal. She knows where the extent of her authority and responsibility falls, like where the line is crossed and where the board needs to take responsibility. And she doesn't mix the two. And sometimes, to her detriment, because people, and I've experienced it, right? In government and in politics, people don't understand the process, automatically assume that, you're responsible for this or you're responsible for that, when the case is not always as black and white. And she's very good about standing her ground on whose responsibility and it is and where it lies, and ensuring that there's accountability to that responsibility, whether it's with the board or whether it's her. But I know I'm talking a lot, but I want to highlight one more point
Sure.
that makes me probably a bit biased towards Maria. Is the first law I passed was the Standard Operating Procedure Bill, where all agencies would have to put their standard operating procedures, how they operate, online on their webpage, transparently, and update them, so that the public is very aware and can see what they do. And I'll tell you, GEC is probably one of the only ones that complied with the law. You go to their website right now, they'll list their SOPs. They have their documents available. It's so transparent.
And that's where I'd like to bring in Mars, because also, before I met Maria Pangilinan informally, I wasn't aware that a human being could smile that much, that consistency. She's a human emoji. She's always got a real good temperament. But as far as knowledge of statute and policy, it's a unique position because you have to know so much about the operating environment and what you can and cannot do, and you're constantly under scrutiny of, you've got your own legal counsel, you've got people double and triple and quadruple fact-checking things to make sure that every move that's made by that agency and every ballot that's counted falls in line with the policy. So as far as, someone who knows what she's doing, how would you feel?
Honestly, I haven't had that much direct interaction with them, but at least the stuff that I've seen coming out of the agency, though, is interesting. Because, like you said, all this stuff is happening right around the time of the election, though, so there's not a lot of time to sit there and go through administrative hearings and wait 30 days every single time somebody, every time you have a hearing or an issue or an issue comes up, though. So it's one of those things where everything really has to be decided very quickly, though. So there's a lot of pressure, especially in that one position.
Yeah, and Sabrina and I can attest probably better than anybody on our staff. It's like, even though election nights have a tendency to be these long, drawn-out affairs, everything that's happening that night is happening so fast. Yeah, it's a series of decisions that have to be made, and every lineup A, B, C, D, E, and and again, Maria does it with a smile on her face. I have no idea how she does that so effortlessly.
One thing they talked about tonight is they are hoping for high voter turnout for the general election. Do you think that we're going to see that?
I think so. I mean, we always have higher voter turnout on gubernatorials in the general, especially. Midterm elections, not so much, but I think with everything that's gone on, I think you're going to see a higher turnout. I think there are a lot of camps, congressional, gubernatorial, not as much on the senatorial, but I think that really pushed for new voters. And so you're seeing a new demographic coming out. We've seen the data on the demographics of voters coming out, and that's changing. And so everything really right now is kind of up in the air, but I do think you're going to see a good voter turnout.
You think so, Mars?
Hopefully. The one thing I guess that would be interesting to see is, especially because we've got these two different candidates that are for the Senate, for the legislature, though, because we're seeing a lot more different types of candidates, at least than I saw the last round, though. So it'll be interesting to see, especially when it comes to certain candidates, who winds up voting for them, though, too. So.
And not just in the senatorial. There's with the race for attorney general. I've seen a lot with Levin really on social media. He's been doing a lot. And I also I'm on his email list. And so, I sign up for all the candidates' email lists. Not like I'm following him. But yeah.
Her inbox is nuts. I administer our Gmail accounts, and her inbox is like out of this world.
Yeah. Are you interested in that race?
Yeah, actually, I've seen a lot more activity from people that I usually don't see interested in politics, especially interested in that one race, which is sort of interesting. That's what I'm really looking at, though, because that has a chance to change a lot of things going on. Though, and it's interesting that it comes down between Doug, who's a person who's been the Attorney General before, and Levin Camacho, though, because I'm not sure how many people outside the legal community are aware of, though, but there's sort of the next 10 years, there's going to be a shift in the lawyers in Guam, though, because there are a lot of lawyers that are on the age of 60 years old, 70 years old, that are going to be retiring in the next 10 years. And these are the names that are on a lot of big law firms on Guam. There are a lot of firms that have been around for a long time. So there's a younger generation of attorneys that are coming up. And it'll be interesting to see, what happens when those people switch over. It'll be interesting to see whether there's a switchover in this election.
So like the top litigators and the top corporate attorneys, maybe in the next decade, you say are going to be maybe in their mid-30s, and we have this youth movement of people just coming out of law school.
We said 60s that they're retiring.
You said with the retirement of so many tenured lawyers.
And talking with other lawyers, we're kind of sitting there trying to figure out, what are the faces of different law firms going to be after about 10 or 20 years, though, because there's also been a push by a lot of newer lawyers to kind of branch out on their own rather than join larger firms. This is Guam, so by larger I mean between 4 and 6, and I think went to 8 at this point, though.
Mhm.
So we're not talking about like big, 1,000-member law firms, though. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with that shift, because there also aren't that many people coming back who are interested in practicing law in Guam. though.
What are, from your standpoint as a practicing lawyer on Guam and within your legal community, what are the major touch points that people that do what you do for a living, what do they look for in an attorney general? Because they're definitely your colleague once they've reached that office, but then they could also potentially be, an opposition, I guess, if you look at it that way.
Yeah, I mean, temperament has a lot to do with it, though. So you see a lot of how people carry themselves in court when you see people on the other side of contentious issues, especially if if you're on this different side of a lawsuit, though. You get sort of a different perspective on how the person acts, though, because people often wind up in very stressful situations, especially if you're dealing with lawsuits or cases where they could involve people going to jail for a long period of time, or it could involve a lot of money, though. There's a lot on the line when it comes to that, though. So you really get a certain perspective on how people carry themselves when there's a lot of stress on them, though, because there's one thing that I always tell people, a lawyer's job is to deal with other people's problems, though. They've got their own problems as well. So it's whenever they're dealing with your case, they're always dealing with other stuff at the same time, and it's always the big thing that they're there for, though. And lawyers aren't cheap, too, so if they're dealing with somebody else's problem, it's a problem that's expensive enough where somebody else needs to hire a lawyer to deal with it.
And then plus you've got the responsibility of actually running that agency, which isn't exactly, like you said, a 2 and 4 person operation.
Yeah, which is an interesting thing, too, though, because Lieben's also a person who's been a solo practitioner, though, for the last few years. So
right.
That'll be a new challenge for him, though. But I don't think that's a reason to count him out, though, because I think he also brings a new perspective into things, though, too, which older lawyers might not necessarily have, though.
Okay, well, Doc, you were rolling your eyes when
No,
Sabrina
no,
first
no,
posed. No. When she first posed the question, I knew you
All
were
right.
chomping at the bit to give your perspective.
Well, it's
on
a
this.
two-part question. Okay, let me go with the two parts. First, voter turnout.
Yeah.
U.S. mainland presidential year, 41%, 42% people voted. Guam, I mean, we have an astounding voter turnout rate compared to a lot of other places in the United States. This race, probably 60% on average would be the ballpark number. But again, it doesn't always track with previous years, but this race is different because there's this thing I talk about all the time called the 3-body problem. If this were a 2-person race, Lou versus Ray, you have 2 people running, you know what to expect. It's like bowling. You throw your ball down, but we have a 3-body problem, and that 3-body problem is these write-in, these little hacking write-in efforts that people constantly make, and I do mean that kind of sort of how it sounds, because when people talk about write-ins, they're just quacking about write-ins. Because when you study them, usually it's about 4 to 8% of people will do a write-in or use that little bubble to write somebody in. It's generally not that much. Now this time the question is, will there be enough of a 3-body problem to reduce the number below 50% plus 1 to then trigger a runoff between Ray and Lou? So basically, instead of them going through 1 election cycle, the same 2 people are going to have to go through 2 election cycles because some people are disgruntled. And not a lot of people can cause this. And that's why Guam should have a sore loser law. If somebody's been named on a ballot, or basically make the primary a qualifying primary, so that if you're qualified at the primary, you go on to the general, and we cut out the whole issue about writing people in because it's very, very unhealthy. So that's the first part. So 60% probably is the number. On the AG's issue.
Wait, I just wanted to get back to that.
Yeah.
You said Ray and Lou as a runoff, but how do you know that write-in candidate doesn't stand a chance and it might be that write-in candidate who's going to have a runoff with?
Because just in the aggregate, 4 to 8%, maybe 12% at the upper level would get any given person a write-in. Because remember, it's not 1 write-in, it's 2 write-ins. So Blas is playing the write-in card, Frank Blas is running the write-in card, and Frank Blas again's running the write-in card. Don't name your child Frank Blas. That's the first thing, okay? And I'm just being facetious.
There's no record,
but yeah.
there's no official where Frank Blas is. It came out on the news, but there's nothing official. Let me just discredit that from the party standpoint. There's no Frank Blas write-in.
Well, also,
ticket.
was it not part of
He
the part?
just said that he did have talks.
I mean,
Yeah.
having a talk and a
With
conversation
some
is very
Republican.
different from
I know.
having a full-blown campaign.
Is it not part of the
But he
unity
could do a write-in.
of the unity pledges that each party in theory takes, though, that they said as part of this you will support your members who actually have advanced and you will not try and drum up
Well,
these,
but
like you
see,
said,
Frank Bloss was
sore
I mean,
loser, sour grape, what happened?
Frank Bloss was not a candidate.
Right.
He didn't
So
sign
there's
the
no-
unity pledge.
Right.
That's basically between the candidates, and really it's for contested elections. You know, if you have more than 15 candidates running for senator, more than 3 candidates running for governor, that, you know, the unity pledge does come in handy. And then just to keep people active in the campaign regardless of whether they lose. If they lose in the primary, you know, you want them to support the party of the general. It's kind of the consensus about it, right? Stay active, don't just be a sore loser and disappear, right? You know, come back home. But, you know, from a party standpoint, there is no official word, nothing that I understand from the party that Frank Bloss is running. So as of right now, there's potentially only one write-in candidate.
But I don't even think there's even one. I think it's just all quacking rumors that these people are narcissism, ego, whatever we
Hey,
want
I
to call
saw the
it.
signs up. There's a sign
Yeah.
over here.
Right across the street from
in,
us.
Yeah.
Frank Guggen.
And crackpots and clowns are everywhere in this business, and we all know this, okay? But back to the original point, Ray has 40, Lou has 40 minimum, so it's a 40-40. That leaves 20 in the center. So the only percentage that these write-ins can cleave is that 20, because the other two are pretty set. So the only outcome of a write-in effort, in my opinion, at this point, unless things radically change, is it'll just simply trigger a runoff, which really shouldn't have been needed to begin with, because it should have been a two-person race to begin with.
It requires a majority vote, and then the thing to touch it on is it's not budgeted for.
Yeah.
Running a run-in campaign's not budgeted for, you know. And so I mean, it's personal opinion. I mean, I think yes, I understand. You know, hey, this is the team that they wanted to win. Well, maybe they should have been more active in the primary campaign to get their team to win. But you know, to be, you know, always, especially, you know, the pundits that always come at the legislature about how they don't agree with our spending and this and budget, and then they're willing, you know, because they're gods who lost, you know, to push this whole thing that could trigger us to a runoff. Of course, cost of, you know, at least maybe quarter of a million potentially. I forget, maybe 237. I forget the specific number for them to run an election. You know, I guess it depends on who you ask, right? Everyone has their choice. I'm not opposed to the write-off. Like, you know, if somebody wants to write in, I mean, Mickey Mouse is probably going to get more votes than any write-in candidate, in historically, probably. But I think despite all that, you have to consider the fiscal aspect, right? There's a time and a place. The election process is a good enough period, right? You want your gods to win, work hard to get them in there.
So, but you don't think, though, that if, because of Ray's gun-grabbing incident, you don't think that if Frank Uggen does mount this write-in campaign, that he could pick up the votes from Ray and then have maybe the 40 instead of the 20, and then it could be 40 Lou, 40
It's still,
Frank?
at the end of the day, it's still going to have to be a majority, 50 plus 1. And that's the thing we can't confuse it with, like a senatorial race where it's a plurality. Because if then we look at it from this point of view of a plurality, then somebody can essentially get elected to governor with 1,000 votes because they got more votes than the people who got 800, 520 of those that were eligible and voting within that election. And so there are so many variables. And so if you kind of read the law and the way it's outlined, there's a specific reason why the public, it's based on the office space, right? 15 senators, you can have a plurality. 1 AG, 1 public auditor, right? One governor, 1 lieutenant governor. They need to be a majority to ensure that this is really the voice of the people, 50 plus 1 of those that were voted and counted.
If you look, the closest model, and I looked at the different models for this, the closest model I've been able to come up with, just for comparison's sakes, has been the Jesse Ventura race in the late 1990s. So you have a Democrat, and then you have a Republican, and then you have Jesse Ventura. And Jesse Ventura actually won that race, and he was able to just barely squeak by with like 1 point over the Democrat and the Republican candidates. But in general, he did that as a named candidate. He didn't do it as a write-in. A write-in is a whole other dimension of civic action that requires a lot of effort.
Has there ever been a significant office that has been taken through? I mean, like at a very, very high level, not just
Congress.
a councilman.
Congressman.
Sure.
I think New Hampshire, it happened about 10 years ago. New Hampshire or Vermont, I can't remember, a write-in got into Congress. But those are just when the stars align just right When
Because
you
of the result of like a massive scandal or
have,
something?
you have all kinds of the right things happen at the right time. And those are
Yeah,
rare conditions,
scandal.
but they can happen. I just don't think it'll happen in this case.
Okay.
I mean, I just to touch on that a little bit more, I can see the appeal, right, of a write-in for Frank Uggan. I mean, he did so well in the election, all things considered, how much money they spent. And so I think,
Or
you know,
didn't spend.
he could appear to many people as being a very, very viable candidate in the general election. So, you know, I don't want to discredit that, right? I mean, that's people's go-to, the one they want to move forward. I get that, I respect that. But there are so many other factors to consider, because the fact that, you know, there was the unity pledge, you know, could potentially lose him votes. And so, you know, if you're not seeing the potential for a win versus you know, losing votes, splitting the votes down and forcing a runoff, then, you know, it would be all for naught. Yeah, people got to, you know, voice their opinion and put something in, but it's going to come at a
I don't know
price
though about
tag.
that unity pledge. I mean, Michelson Nicholas didn't sign it when he ran for senator last time.
But see, there's
he was like top vote
But
getter.
there's a difference between signing it and following it versus signing it and breaking it. You know, if you don't sign it, you don't sign it. It's not expected either way, right? However,
I just figure if we're going to deal with party unity, might as well just have the parties decide who runs for each one of their offices, though.
and that was the idea behind the primary.
And yeah, but no, that's why no. Let them decide who runs, though. Not have
Yeah.
a primary. Let each
And
party
just go
decide,
straight.
and then just go. That way, if we have one of these runoffs because somebody wants to write in anyway, then we only have to deal with one extra election instead of having 3 elections to determine everything.
Okay, well, there's a structural thing, and I kind of like the elephant in the room. I know I was begging Sabrina before we were doing this to talk about this, is because there is a bill that's been introduced in your legislature, Senator, talking about should Guam even have the primary election leading up to the general? Should we just have like a one and done, and it would be a massive election? You know, you'd have a ton of candidates, but it would all be sussed out and ironed out in one fell swoop.
Well, the problem with just eliminating the primaries, it didn't answer the question of the majority or the plurality. And there was an argument in the legislature and debate about it, right? Some of us believe that majority, especially for a single office race, was 50 plus 1, which makes a lot of sense. It's just right. You don't want your governor to be elected with just 100 votes because the other guy got, you know, 85. Majority versus plurality. But the biggest thing that, and the reason I couldn't support that, is it didn't answer the question, and there wasn't enough work put into it to answer the question on the AG or public auditor. Those are single offices. So if you had 5 candidates running, right, with no primary in the general, with those single offices of attorney general, we could even say the mayors, because since it's one office, one seat, not like the legislature, you're going to have runoff after runoff after runoff until you have the top 2. And of the top 2, who gets 50 plus 1? That's why you reduce down to 2, because if you have 2 candidates for a single office, you guarantee at the end of that it's going to be 49 or 51 for the most part.
I prefer a little bit of a different model, and it's along the similar lines. The problem is the California Democratic Party versus Jones case in 2000 threw out what we call a open blanket primary, so you can vote on any side of the ballot you want. I think if Guam wanted to, we could throw out our partisan primary, our party primary, and do what's called a qualifying primary, where you simply qualify people to go forward to the general election. So we have 5 people running for governor. The top 2 in that race go forward, and they run off. You don't allow write-ins. You don't allow anybody else. You have 15 senators. You have 100 senatorial candidates. The top 30 proceed, and then they run off at the general to qualify for their position. It's a far better system, but it takes the parties out of control of the ballot. And so the parties sometimes don't like it. But I have a feeling eventually Guam's going to have a qualifying primary, because once we have a third party, this entire flip the page over structure goes out the window.
I think it's a great model. I mean, I was looking at that too. Some other thing I considered was, at least for the senatorial, right, because it's a plurality. It's a lot easier to do election reform for the senatorial campaign is, okay, you know, the party's free to have their election. But if you're running as an independent or any other political party not affiliated with, then there's no reason to be in the primary. If it's a partisan election, for at least for the senatorial office, then you don't need to do a primary election because you're not part of the party. You can shoot straight up to the general. So you can have 15 Republican, 15 Democrat, and then 15, you know, independent or whatever. but it's equal to the number of seats available. And that's what we have to focus on, the number of seats. So you might have 45 candidates running for office, but you have Republicans, Democrats, and whatever else, up to 15.
Yeah, so Mars, what say you on this issue? Because, I mean, obviously there, the various political parties have their own interests and they want to, have control and leverage and everything like that. But what the senator is saying is it also comes down to a problem of math.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I don't know.
It's not easy, because you can say, okay, well, it would be, you just say, have one night, have everybody just basically like battle it out, like in sports terms and everything like that, figure it all out, and the top winner for that race advances and everything.
I'm such a fan of parliaments.
Yeah.
So,
but then again, obviously it would also save money though.
huh?
If you just had like a one night shot, as opposed to two big events that you have to lead
Well,
up.
I think even to his point, you would still need two, because for the single seat offices, you would still need to establish the top two, right? It might be Green Party, Red Party, or Green Party and Republican, or Red Party and Democrat. Doesn't matter what the party is, right? Any party can run with their ideals, but you're still going to have like what he's calling a qualifier, what you want to call a primary. Because right now the primary, even though it's a partisan election, counts also as a qualifier. You end up with the two top candidates going forward in the general election that establishes the majority 50+1. But if you have three, that makes it a lot more difficult to establish a 50+1, which then would trigger the runoff election, to where you're always going to end up with two running for one office.
And is it our friends up in Saipan, they just do this structure of like no primary just for their midterm elections, or?
I am not sure. All I know is I've spoken with them because we're planning on doing coverage of the Saipan elections, and I was going through their timeline, and there's no primary election there, so it's just the general. So, but I wanted to get on to talk about the nonpartisan races. We have the Consolidated Commission on Utilities that's on the ballot. You have former Senators Michael Untiaco, incumbent Simon Sanchez, Francis Santos, and then you have Will Parkinson running. So there's 3 seats up for grabs, so one of them won't move forward. But the Guam Education Board, there are 6 seats from what I understand that are open, but only 4 people ran, and it's 4 incumbents.
By the way, there's 4 people don't even have to run for that. They're automatically qualified because there's no write-in provision in the Guam Education Board. I don't know.
So it's purely a formality.
I don't know what genius down at the legislature made that rule. I mean, I'm just. By the way, I have the world of respect for Senator Fernando. I'm just whoever said no write-ins for the school. By the way, I did a little test. I'm on the school board, and I said, hey, you should run for the school board, and then that way the new governor can appoint somebody else instead of you. I'm like, okay. I went down there and I looked. And the bureaucracy to try to get yourself on the ballot as a school board member is stifling. It's almost as bad as running for the legislature. And you have to get a police clearance, court clearances, signatures, and all these other things. And to be blunt, for a subordinate board like that, for a little bitty board, the CUC doesn't have to do these things in that sort of way.
I don't know. The Guam Education Board, I mean, I'm fine with the court clearance, because I wouldn't want, but somebody convicted of a...
No doubt, but you can have a person make a sworn declaration in front of a government employee. I hereby swear under penalty of perjury that I have never been arrested, convicted. You can make them declare, which is probably better than a court clearance, because the court clearance only covers this jurisdiction. There's no telling where people parachute in from and what they've done in other places.
But why do you think we're not seeing more people running for the Guam Education
The bureaucracy's stifling. I went down there and personally checked it. It's incredible. And by the way, I surrendered after 4 hours. I'm like, no, I'm already on here. I'm going to just time out my term on it and be done with it. But those 4 people that signed up and they're in, they're done. It's in. In fact, they only need 1 vote and they're in. Yeah. Because there's no write-in provision, and there's also 2 open slots that the new governor can appoint for. So. And by the way, the 4 that are on the ballot are all fine people, and I look forward to working with them.
I think they're all 4 incumbents.
Yeah, their incumbents are wonderful,
Maria,
and they're hardworking.
Mark Manjola,
Mr. Lujan.
Lourdes, St. Nicholas, and Mr. Lujan.
Yeah, he's great.
All right, any final comments on the election?
Yeah, I hope one night we can talk about why people lost the big races and talk about it in detail. Maybe one night we can do that. And also...
we will be the pessimism night.
Yeah.
The Hydro Flask will be half empty that night. Absolutely.
I would love that night.
That's right. and by the way, I love working with Senator Fernando. He always gives some really neat insights and helps me to think about things I haven't thought about. And Mars, I've talked about or talked with ever since on these kinds of issues. It's always fun. It's always a pleasure to be on the after party with you guys.
By the way, did any of you guys attend any of the forums today? I know there was a congressional forum.
No.
Or the senatorial.
They're
forum.
going quick. Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't had the opportunity yet. And we're going into session next week, so a lot of prep. We have a large docket.
I know
to catch
tonight
up on.
the Pacific Island Association,
PARS.
PARS is holding their forum tonight at the Tamuning Senior Citizen Center. We actually recorded it, so I can't wait to watch that because I know, Robert Celestial, he has been pounding the pavement on the whole RECA radiation exposure compensation.
He's a hero in my book.
Yeah.
I mean, just talk to that guy. I mean, he is a treasure of knowledge, and it requires a certain kind of passion to advocate like that guy's advocated. I
And
mean,
he did
definitely an
it when everybody
inspiration.
told him he couldn't do it. That's what I love about it.
Well, and if you are very passionate about this issue, as Robert Celestial is, you can also check out a podcast that our very own King Conception did with him. That's on today, right on our SoundCloud feed. Or if you subscribe to our podcast, you're going to get it in your iTunes feed, probably in about 5 minutes. Yeah. So that's up already if you want to look more into that.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Senator Fernando Esteves, Attorney Morris Johnson, and Kingdom's analyst Ron McNinch.
Thank you, gentlemen.
For Jason Salas, I'm Sabrina Salas-Matanani. Thanks for watching.